A few things to know before you fly WestJet to Nashville. You don't need cowboy boots to have a great time in Nashville. You don't need a cowboy hat either. You don't even need to be a country music fan. To have a great time in Nashville, you just need to go to Nashville. WestJet can certainly help with that, with great low WestJet fares nonstop from Calgary to Nashville. Visit WestJet.com or call your travel agent.
Blog Talk Radio.
Hello and welcome to the show. My name is Laurie Smith. I'm your host. This is The Whole Issue, and I've been on Blog Talk Radio here for years now, and this is just a show that I just started doing. It's brought to you by CDAT Radio, produced by Tony Angelo, and hope you'll check those links out. I have those links on the episode info underneath the little player there. Hopefully you'll see those. Check his links out. There's some amazing work being done, and hopefully you'll take a look at some of it, and if you have time. And yeah, welcome to the show. This is really the first show. The first show I did 2 weeks ago was just an introductory show, and just talked for an hour about the issues of kind of what this show will be about. And so you can go back and listen to that if you want to. Yeah, this is a huge issue, looking at the issues of domestic violence and abuse, sexual assault, CSA Child Sexual Abuse, just child sex trafficking. It's horrific, right? It's not. This is basically a show geared to looking at the topics, the horrific issues going on with the abuse of women. And I'm a survivor. I'm a secondhand survivor of domestic violence. Thank God I've never been in a domestic violence situation really, as myself. But my parents were highly abusive. My dad was abusive to my mother. My mother would retaliate, and the two of them fought all the time. Physical abuse, and just a lifetime of hell. So I'm kind of very knowledgeable about this stuff, just having survived as a secondhand victim. And so, but I don't, I've never been in a situation where some of these women have been, being abused and battered and whatnot as an adult. I was just abused as a child, right? And so, but I do understand the dynamics of it. I've known so many people who have been abused, and it's just horrific. And I speak about these things because I don't want them to get shoved under the carpet. I just keep speaking about them and raising awareness, and, I'm just one more voice out here with everybody else's. You have to listen at your own discretion. I'm talking about really, sensitive material most of the time. Everything I do on Blog Talk Radio that's not biblical is going to be quite graphic. And so, you have to listen at your own discretion. If you think the show is going to bother you, you just turn it off. You just have to listen at your own discretion. And if you're a minor under the age of 18, I just ask that you would have someone listen to the show with you just to help you make sure it's appropriate for you. And because we're going to be talking about topics that are very adult-oriented, and I don't know how young the people are that will be listening on the players around that are placed around. And so this is an adult topic show, really. And if you're a child and you're being abused, you make sure you get some help. You tell about 200,000 people, get a police report, several, and get evidence and back it up and get yourself out of that abuse. If you're a woman or a man who's being abused right now, you get some help. Right, this is absolutely horrific, and this is going on. This is why we're doing this show. This is why I'm doing this show. And I don't want to candy coat it and make it sound like it's more palpable, more palatable for digestion for people. Abuse is ugly. It's horrible. The actual survivors, the victims first of all, if they do survive, then have to try to figure out how they're going to move from victim to a survivor, and then to someone who's actually able to function and live in this world, because no one wants to see the ugliness of abuse. I know because I grew up abused as a child, and I know what it's like to be on that end, just being, shunned in my own family and then rejected by a world that doesn't want to know about this, and they don't want to know about abuse. But the issue is it's happening, and we need to keep on talking about this, and we need to get, as much information out to people as possible, and get people seriously looking at these issues and helping people. Because it's a tragedy. It really is. It's a tragic issue. It's not just North American issues. This is worldwide, obviously. And mostly I'll be focusing on information that is just kind of North American, just because I live in Canada. I'm from the States. And so, I grew up in the States. I live in Canada now. I know what's going on in both countries. And I guess we'll just kind of focus there. But the issues are worldwide. And I did lots and lots of shows on the worldwide epidemic of human rights abuses, child abuse, and human rights abuses before, many years ago, actually. But you can go catch those if you want to. But, thanks for joining me here. I really appreciate it. We'll get right into this. And this is an hour-long show. I usually just do half-hour shows. In the morning, I do one child abuse survivor to another, the journey, the restoration. And I do that Mondays and Friday mornings just for a half hour. And once in a while, I throw in another show here and there. But I'll be doing this show. I'm going to try to do this particular show, the whole issue, looking at abuse and women and issues surrounding it, probably every other week for now. And try to stick to Wednesday nights at the same time, 10 o'clock p.m. Mountain Standard Time. So the chat room's open. You're welcome to sit in there. And I'm not really checking the chat room too often. If you do type a question in there, it might take me a sec or two to get over there to see if there's anybody there and to see if you're posting a question. I'm not going to take people right directly on the switchboard here, just because I used to do that. I used to take guests on that I didn't know who people were, and I had a lot of trolls coming on my show, kind of trying to ruin my show, which they couldn't ruin it because I just boot them off. But the issue is that I take these shows very seriously because this is a huge issue. This is being born into abuse and watching the abuse of my mother, and then being abused by my mother and my dad and a brother of mine who sexually abused me. Just has scarred my life, and it's taken me everything I have just to get where I'm at today, and that's why I do these shows. And so I take this very seriously. This is not just fun, for me. This is a serious issue. I want to do as much as possible with the time that I have left here on the earth, and hopefully, somebody out there will get something out of this, and it will just stir your innermost parts of your heart to get involved in whatever way you can to stop child abuse, to stop, abuse against anyone, right? And to look out for the people around you, to make sure they're not being abused, especially in your own family, because that's generally where it's happening. And speak up, speak out. There's so many people who are murdered, and so many women, so many even men. But this show is focusing on the abuse of women. But we know that domestic violence and abuse affects everyone involved, whether it's a man, woman, or child. Anybody who's in this situation is going to pay the price for this. And, we need to speak out about this stuff. And we need to not shove it back under the carpet, hide it behind those closed window blinds, and pretend that it's not happening. Because it's happening. And you just look around at the headlines out there. We're not going to look at headlines tonight, but I don't know if we will even bother doing that. But the issues are what they are. This is a huge mess for these people out here. And so I don't mind speaking out about this stuff. I have no problem talking about this because I remember the fights between especially with my dad, beating my mother up when I was really little. And then sometimes my mom would retaliate and then abuse my dad, like bash him with really heavy things and try to break his head open, and just horrible things like that. I grew up with this. I was also being abused by both my parents, and I just grew up in a very violent home, a lot of violence, and it was horrific to witness this, to be a part of it. And so, I can't just close my eyes and just pretend it didn't happen, and I can't just walk away from it and say, oh, well, it doesn't matter, It did matter, it does matter. We all have a voice, right? And so that's why, I have no problem doing these shows. But hopefully you'll get something out of this. I have covered actually most of this material on my other shows here, but it was years ago. there's more up-to-date statistics and there's more up-to-date information out there nowadays, so I don't mind redoing this series. I've done tons and tons of shows on domestic violence and abuse, way back probably 2010, 2011, and I've done like 1,150, like 52 shows or something like that here on Blog Talk Radio, just on my own shows. But I've done like 500 for another not-for-profit as well, that are on another not-for-profit. And so I've been speaking on Blog Talk Radio here for quite a few years, doing a lot of shows, and sometimes I would do 2 shows a day, 2 or 3, sometimes, just depends. And I don't mind, bringing this information out, because it's absolutely horrific what's going on, and we need to talk about it. And there's some really good shows here on Blog Talk Radio that are already doing this. This is just one show I wanted to include in with my other shows, because I do talk a lot about the issues of abuse and domestic violence and child abuse. Mainly my focus is child abuse issues and the prevention of child abuse and also for adult survivors of child abuse, right? But hey, I don't mind doing a 1-hour show a week or every 2 weeks, discussing these issues of domestic violence and abuse, because this is how I grew up, and it affected my family in a huge way. I wrote books, I wrote A Life of Death or Redemption, and talking a little bit about the domestic violence between my parents and the fact that some of my siblings actually were involved in domestic violence situations. And one of my sisters was abused by her husband, and she divorced him. Thank God she got out. But my other sister, my oldest sister, was the one who became the abuser in the situation and abused her husband, because she was just she was just like, well, I was already abused as a child, so nobody else is going to abuse me, so I'm now the abuser, and she abused her husband. So it can go both ways, and it's horrific, what people do. And then, of course, nobody talks about it, because they don't want to ruin the family dinner. It's kind of like, you're sitting around somebody's house and, it's 20, you're older, you're an adult, you've survived the abuse, and people are sitting around at these family, quote unquote, gatherings, and everybody's passing the potatoes and the whatever else is on the table for dinner. And nobody wants to discuss the fact that, most of the people sitting around the table are abusers, right? And somebody's the victim sitting there, or was the victim, right? This goes on in families. It goes on in so many people's lives, and it's so often unchecked, unnoticed, and nobody even wants to discuss it because it's so ugly. It's just so it's so disturbing. I think that people they don't even want to discuss it. It's kind of like, if we have to discuss it, then we have to do something about it. So let's not discuss it. We'll just keep it going, status quo. No problem, That's why my parents were allowed to continue abusing each other their whole entire marriage, which they stayed married. They never did separate. And my mom had a chance to get out. She had multiple chances to get out. She had friends. She had support, which is different than a lot of women, But this is the issue. I know a lot about this stuff, and so that's why I don't mind speaking out about it. So we'll get right into this. What I want to do tonight is just take a look at some of the statistics out there. It's been a long time since I've looked at statistics, especially for domestic violence. So this will be interesting for me. I hope it's interesting for you. You can pull this information up yourself just by going to the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, NCADV. And that's the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence website. You can go there and get all kinds of info there. This is where I pulled these PDF documents up. They've got them right there. And this is their information from their website. And it's probably the most current stuff that I've seen. They said here, what is domestic violence? And this is Domestic Violence National Statistics. What is domestic violence? They said, excuse me, I've been talking all day. I've been busy, up since like 6 o'clock this morning, talking all day, and running around like a crazy person. And now it's 10 o'clock at night, and I'm still busy and talking. But if you'll just bear with me, I think we'll get through this. Domestic violence is the willful intimidation, physical assault, battery, sexual assault, and or other abusive behavior as part of a systematic pattern of power and control perpetrated by one intimate partner against another. It includes physical violence, sexual violence, threats, and emotional or psychological abuse. And the frequency and severity of domestic violence varies dramatically. In this situation, I look at this and it just speaks of my life, with my parents growing up in this systematic abusive home is what it was. And that's why it's abuse. It's not discipline, especially with child abuse. My parents were arrested and brought up on child abuse charges. And because they had abused my brother, they had abused us all, but they got busted abusing my brother because they sent him to school. My mom sent him to school in a turtleneck, and he was all beat up, and it was summertime, and it was hot, and the teachers noticed, and they got involved. And they took him to the principal, and then they got the police involved, and my brother told them that he was afraid to go home. He was afraid for his life. And my parents were hauled into court, both of them. All the siblings told exactly what my parents had been doing to us. And I was just a really little girl, so I don't remember the actual court proceedings or anything like that. I probably wasn't even at those. I don't remember that part, but I do remember the social workers that came around because we were left in the home. This was 1960s. We were left in the home. It was like, no problem. My parents were told that they had to meet certain, certain requirements in order to keep us in the home. They were supposed to be going to all kinds of counseling and marital counseling, personal counseling, for their personal issues as well as marital issues. Family counseling we were supposed to have, and all the older siblings, and who were all older than me. I'm the youngest in the family. And did they do it? Well, they went to 2 sessions, and that's it. And the courts just signed off. The social workers signed off. It was, I think, a couple of years. The social workers stopped coming around, and then the abuse just started all over again. It never really stopped, but at least it was kept at bay. But as soon as the social workers signed off, that was it. So, my parents just got away with this, and my mom could have got out, at that time, because she could have just, had us go into care for a while until they could work their differences out, and either divorce or try to make it work and go to counseling if they really loved each other, my parents, right? But this is the issue, it's systematic. It's a horrific situation for these people. Domestic violence is a willful intimidation, physical assault, battery, sexual assault, and or other abusive behavior as part of a systematic pattern of power and control perpetrated by one intimate partner against another. And it includes physical violence, sexual violence, threats, emotional or psychological abuse. The frequency and severity of domestic violence varies dramatically. So that's very true. They said here, domestic violence and its effects. So every 9 seconds, they said, in the U.S., a woman is assaulted or beaten. So every 9 seconds, you count to 9. 1001, 1002, 1003, 1004, 1005, 1006, 1007, 1008, 1009. There we go. There's one woman in the United States being assaulted or beaten in the United States alone. So that's not worldwide, that's just in the United States. That's horrific. Every 9 seconds. In the United States, an average of 20 people are physically abused by intimate partners every minute. And this equates to more than 10 million abuse victims annually. That's horrific. That is just horrific. 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men have been physically abused by an intimate partner. So that's 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men have been physically abused by an intimate partner. That's crazy. This is sort of, similar to the child abuse statistics. Who are these people? These are people like you and me. And, these are people that just try and, out there living their lives who are being abused by someone. And 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men have been physically abused by an intimate partner. That's insane. It says here, 1 in 5 women and 1 in 7 men have been severely physically abused by an intimate partner. Severely physically abused by an intimate partner. 1 in 5 women, 1 in 7 men. It's horrific. And they said 1 in 7 women and 1 in 18 men have been stalked. And stalking causes the target to fear that he or she or someone close to them will be harmed or killed, right? And stalking is a big issue. They said here, on a typical day, domestic violence hotlines nationwide receive approximately 20,800 calls. So over 20,000 calls on a typical day. The domestic violence hotlines, just in the United States alone, they receive that many calls, 20,000 calls. That's insane. That's every day. Every day. I know that here where I live in Calgary, in Alberta, Canada, the domestic violence shelters are full year round, and there's a lot of them. There's a bunch of them. There's not just one. This is a big city. It's kind of like Houston. It's a big city. It's an oil city. It's an oil town, cow town kind of thing. Sort of same type of city as Houston or any of those type of places, Dallas or something like that. And the domestic violence shelters are full all the time. And who are these people? These are people like the people that live right next to you, or people in your own family, or people in our neighborhood, or people who we work with. These are who these people are. right? This is just affects it affects us all, actually, when you come down to it. Even if we're not being directly affected by it, it does affect us all eventually. Excuse me. It's just horrific. They said here, the presence of a gun in a domestic violence situation increases the risk of homicide by 500%. Well, I guess so. Because somebody's got a gun and they're abusive and they're using their power for control. If there's a gun involved, it increases the risk of homicide by 500%. That's nuts. But it happens. It happens in my city. It happens in all kinds of cities and all sorts of towns all throughout the United States and Canada and worldwide. Domestic violence accounts for 15% of all violent crime. Now that's crazy when you think about it. 15% of all violent crime is domestic violence. That's nuts. Domestic violence is most common among women between the ages of 18 and 24. That's young, when you think about it. This is a sort of a, not an old group. This is not an older population group. This is a younger population group, 18 to 24. That's nuts. And they said here, 19% of domestic violence involves a weapon. So 19%, some type of weapon. So that's almost 20%. And that's not good, because a weapon, what are we talking? Anything that can be used as a weapon, I suppose. But that's horrible. It's absolutely horrific. Domestic victimization is correlated with a higher rate of depression and suicidal behavior. Well, yeah, that's obvious. People who are abused and victimized, especially if it's in a situation with their partner, whether it's a man or a woman, any type of partnership or marriage or whatever, it of course is going to cause those sort of behaviors, those sort of feelings, right? It's so damaging. It's absolutely damaging. Only 34% of people who are injured by intimate partners receive medical care for their injuries. 34% out of 100% of people who are injured by intimate partners, only 34% receive medical care for their injuries. So the rest just don't get care. They don't get help. So they're just live with their wounds or, try to patch themselves up as best they can. That's just horrific, right? Not at all good. This is just kind of a small section here. Economic effects. Victims of domestic violence lose a total of 8 million days of paid work per year. That's just studies that they've done. 8 million days of paid work each year. That's crazy. The cost of domestic violence exceeds $8.3 billion annually. So it does affect us all. See, that's what I'm saying. It does, even if we're not being abused, it will eventually trickle down and affect us in some point, right? The cost of domestic violence exceeds $8.3 billion, not a million, billion annually. That's sort of roughly right around the same lines as child abuse, It's probably a little bit more than that. It's nuts. Between 21 and 60% of victims of domestic violence lose their jobs due to reasons stemming from the abuse. 21 to 60%. Well, yeah, because if they can't go to work because they've been abused, or their partner is not letting them leave the house because they're trying to control all their movements, and they won't let them leave the house, and they can't go to work. They might have had a job and then lost it, or just because they're being beaten and battered and they can't go out because of the wounds. There's only so much covering up you can do. I know I was abused as a child, so I know I know about this, and I also know about what my dad used to do to my mother too. There's only so much you can do with some of these wounds, right? You can only hide so much, right? And it's horrific. It absolutely is. Between 2003 and 2008, 142 women were murdered in their workplace by former or current intimate partners, and this amounts to 22% of workplace homicides among women. Now that's crazy. Just between the years, that's a 5-year period, between 2003 and 2008, 142 women were murdered in their workplace by former or current intimate partners. And this amounts to 22% of workplace homicides. That's nuts. I know that happened a couple of years ago here in Calgary. That happened to a couple, it was a married couple, and a woman was shot dead outside of her workplace by her husband, and they caught him and everything. But it's absolutely horrific. She's gone. She's dead. Right? Terrible. Absolutely terrible. They said why it matters. Domestic violence is prevalent in every community and affects all people, regardless of age, socioeconomic status, sexual orientation, gender, race, religion, or nationality. Physical violence is often accompanied by emotional, abusive, and controlling behavior as part of a much larger systematic pattern of dominance and control. And domestic violence can result in physical injury, psychological trauma, and even death. And the devastating consequences of domestic violence can cross generations and last a lifetime. Absolutely. And you think about what it does just to the victim who's being abused, and then if there's children in the home, you think about the damage done there. Even a lot of times, you see these articles where people will say, well, he or she wasn't abusing the children, they were just abusing me, right? The partner would say that, whoever was being abused. But the children are going to be affected by it anyway, because they're not dumb. They know what's going on. Even if they don't witness it and they're in a different room with the doors closed, they're going to know about the abuse, and they're going to know that something's wrong and something's not right. And then if it's physical abuse, they're going to see the damage done to whoever the victim is, and they're going to know, right? And it's absolutely horrific. Now, in my home, my dad used to beat up my mother in front of us, so we all knew what was going on. My brothers would try to step in and save my mom. My older brothers, they were quite a bit older than me. They were teens, and they'd step in and try to help my mom, and then my dad would beat them up. And that's just the way it went. And then later, I took the role on because my siblings were either dead or out on the streets, or moved to Canada or whatever. And I took the role on because I was the last child in the home, last one, and they hadn't managed to kill me yet, so I was still alive. And so I thought that I should protect my mother. This is psychological damage done. My mother was my main abuser, but I talk about that on my morning shows if anybody's interested in checking all that out. But I took that role on as protector for my mother, and then I'd try to step in between my dad and my mom, and that would turn violent, and my dad would end up beating me up, And so, this is sort of the way it goes. It's not like my parents tried to hide this from us. We knew what was going on, and absolutely horrific to know that this is going on. I used to sit in school, I used to sit in class and wonder who was going to kill who, because my mom was always threatening to kill my dad. She'd be like, if he touches me one more time, I'm going to kill him, and we'd be like, you should leave. All of my siblings used to tell my mother, to get out and to move out, get her own place, leave our abusive dad. And because everybody just loved my mother, we all did, even though she was my main abuser. We loved our mom, and we didn't want to see her suffering. She was abused as a child, and this is a horrific situation. But, she was like I say, she was shackled in her mind. I've said this before on several of my shows, but she was shackled in her mind. She wasn't tied up, physically in the house. My dad didn't tie her up and make her stay in the house and abuse her. She was tied up and shackled in her mind. She thought that was her life, was just to suffer in this abusive relationship with this man. And she had given up. She gave up. And that's what can happen to people, is just when they're just abused and abused and abused and abused, they just give up. And, it doesn't excuse what she did to me. There's no excuse for abuse, period. You can't possibly excuse abuse away. So there's no excuse for what she did to me, physically abusing me, emotionally, psychologically abusing me, letting my brother rape me. She knew about the rape, and she did nothing to stop it. So my brother raped me for about a year when I was 8, and he was 21, and I'm bearing it because of the scars and the child sexual abuse, right? So horrific, she did nothing to stop it. So I don't excuse her behavior away just because she was abused. But I also, on the other hand, know that she was abused and have to look at it from that end of it to say, well, that wasn't right either, what my dad was doing to her. See, that's why that's why even after she did what she did to me and abusing me my whole life, really from birth, I still felt that it was the right thing to do to protect her, right? To try to protect her, which, I would try, and then I'd get beaten up for it by my dad, but I thought that was the right thing to do. And it was, actually. Because there's no excuse for abuse. See, this is a situation that's just so horrific. People will excuse this away. Oh, he had too much to drink, or oh, she didn't know what she was doing, or oh, he didn't mean to do that. It was my fault. They'll take on the blame or whatever. Now, my mom didn't do that. She never took on the blame for the abuse that my dad was dishing out at her. She never took that role on, but she was just she just felt that was her lot in life, and she was just stuck there, And so many times people will stay in those situations, and this is so horrific. It's not even funny. No one should be abused. No one should let themselves be abused. No one should be, and because that's not love. And my mom knew that. My mom wasn't hanging around for love, thinking, "Oh, well, he loves me. It's, he's hurting me, but he loves me." She wasn't staying because of that. She was staying because she felt that she couldn't do anything else. Where was she going to go? She had no skills, no job skills. She just had a bunch of children that she didn't want, and that's why my parents abused us, because they didn't want us. And it's horrific. And I think she was just shackled in her mind. And I think deep down she did love my dad, and she wasn't hoping for anything better, but she just stayed, right? But so many times I think you read material and you see these stories out here of women who will stay because they think, well, he loves me, or or if a man's being abused, by their partner, they love me. I know they do. They're hurting me, but they don't mean it. And so many times, like, we'll go through some of this stuff. We're going to take a look at the dynamics of this stuff. But we're just briefly talking about this stuff here tonight. But this is, it's horrific. It's absolutely horrific. You don't allow yourself to be abused. If you're in a situation, I'm telling you, which you'll probably hear me say this on every single show, because I'm talking to you, whoever's listening. If you're not being abused, thank God for that, But if you are, you find a way to get some help. You find a way to get out. Get a safety plan. Do something. If there's children involved, you've got to get out and get your children to safety. And you have to make sure you do it right. Get a safety plan. And there's ways that you can do that. So we're going to look at all of this stuff. But if you don't know, just go to this NCADV, National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, and all the information's right there. And you can find it really quickly. You don't have to listen to my shows. If you're being abused, first of all, tell somebody, get some help, Reach out and get some help. It is just so important. Do not allow yourself to be abused, right? It's absolutely horrific. So this is, they said, domestic violence can result in physical injury, psychological trauma, even death. The devastating consequences of domestic violence can cross generations and last a lifetime. Absolutely. And it does. It affects people for life. This is very serious stuff. This is a neat part of this article here where they talk about, here's the question, why do people stay in abusive relationships? So now we've looked at the statistics, and now we're going to look at why people stay in abusive relationships. So their answers to this are one of the most common, this is their information here, one of the most common questions people ask about victims of domestic violence is, why don't they just leave? This is what a lot of people ask this question. A lot of people have asked me that question, why I would stay and allow my mother, both my parents abused me, but why I would sit there and stay in that abusive environment, right, instead of getting out and getting help. And these are some of the issues here. So they said people stay in abusive relationships for a variety of reasons, including, they list here a whole bunch. We'll just go through them. The victim fears the abuser's violent behavior will escalate if he or she tries to leave. That's a big one, because there have been many cases. If you take a look at the articles and take a look at, instead of just passing them by, and read these people's stories, many times when they are trying to get out, that's when they're murdered. And so it's very, very, you have to be very careful about that when you're going to leave an abusive situation where someone is really threatening your life, and your life isn't in danger. So of course you want to get out, and you want to flee to safety somewhere, and to a shelter or something, or somewhere just to get safe. And this is when the murders actually take place, because obviously he or she is trying to leave, the victim, trying to leave and get to safety, and the abuser then kills them, right? So you have to be very careful. The abuser this is another reason why they said, that why don't people just leave? The abuser has threatened to kill the victim's family, friends, pets, children, and or himself or herself. That's another reason. Threatening to kill the victim's family, friends, pets, children, and or himself, herself. That's a big issue, People think twice about leaving when somebody's got their children with a knife to their throat, and or a gun to their head, saying, I'll kill so and so if you leave, Do you think you're going to walk away from a situation like that? No, you just stay. Because you don't want your children to be killed, right? Even though they're being killed anyway, day by day by day, little by little by little. You're just thinking, well, maybe we eventually get free, but in the meantime, I don't want them to put a bullet in my child's head or stab them to death just because I'm trying to get out to safety. And a lot of people will do that and they'll do that with pets, or the victim's family, like the victim's parents, right? It's like the abuser might say something like, I'll kill your family if you leave, or I'll kill your parents if you leave, or I'll kill your friends or your pets, And then sometimes it's just the issue of if they think that they can manipulate them enough, psychologically manipulate them, they'll threaten to kill themselves, which then in turn the person who's being abused, because there's that original relationship that they used to have where they thought it was love, they still love that person, and so they don't want that person to kill themselves, so they say, I'll stay, and the abuser then, of course, does that whole cycle thing of, I didn't mean to hurt you, and then whoever it is, whether it's a woman or a man, and then starts the abuse all over again. It's just a cycle. It's just a game, is what it is. It's a game. It's a control game. It's a power game. It's a deadly game, and people are losing their lives. Not only that, but these children ending up dead. They're losing their lives. It's absolutely horrific. So these are these issues, that people just wonder, why don't they leave? People have asked me that, and I just look at them and I'm like, why? People say, well, why didn't you just run away? There was a lot of reasons why I didn't run away. I didn't want to end up on the street, first of all, being picked up in a child sex trade ring or something, or end up as a child prostitute or something. I went to my parents. Actually, it wasn't my parents, but it was my mom and my oldest sister went to Vegas one time to gamble. They took me and my nephews with them. They dumped us off in the street, and they went and gambled. Not a good idea. I think I was about 11 years old, 12 years old. And my nephews were younger than me, and here we are in the streets of Las Vegas, and people thought I was a child hooker, and one man tried to pick me up. Tried to pick me up as a child prostitute. Right. And I'm like, luckily there was another guy standing close by who actually realized what was going on and came over and pretended to be my dad, which was really nice. And that guy just said he was, I didn't touch her, which he really didn't. Well, he did kind of. He had his hands around my shoulders and stuff. But this guy stepped in and he pretended he was my dad to get this guy to leave me alone. But this is why. See, so many times people won't run away. But that's just my story. But anyway, back to what's going on here. The abusers threaten to. Well, this is why people don't leave. Because this abuser, whoever it is, man or woman, somebody whoever the abuser has got a knife or a gun to either their children's throats, or their pets, or threatening to kill their families. It wouldn't be so easy to walk away and leave in a situation like that, right? Another one is, they said here, the victim loves his or her abuser and believes that he or she will change. That's a big one. People fall for that all the time. I know I did, but not in the same situation with my parents, but dealing with child abuse. But the victim loves his or her abuser and believes that he or she will change. This is a hard one, and I know exactly what this is like coming from abuse, but just dealing with child abuse, which is very much related. It's sort of the same. When somebody's abused, it's abuse, right? But, that's just it, They fell in love, got together, whoever this couple is, whoever these people are, these abuser-victim couple. And that love is kind of, even though there's abuse going on, and any type of abuse, doesn't matter, physical, emotional, psychological, sexual abuse going on, the abuser's hurting the victim still loves that person. And they think that if they just hold on and behave and don't trigger these abuse scenarios and situations, that because they're taking the blame on pretty well probably, that the abuser will change and they'll love them. If they just do the right things and do what the abuser wants, then they'll love them, right? It's all looking for love, right? Wanting that love so bad that they'll allow themselves to be abused. That's what happened to me. I had a couple of interventions done. I could have got out away from my abusive mother who was trying to kill me. And I loved her so much. I just wanted her to love me, I didn't want to be removed from my home. None of my other siblings were thrown out of the house. It's not that my parents loved them. It's just that they didn't throw them out. But it's just horrific, right? It's absolutely horrific what people will do to hurt people. So many times I think the abuser, they'll say stuff like, the abuser who's in control and has the power and is abusing the poor victim, whoever it is, will tell them, I wouldn't have to do this if you, I wouldn't have to hurt you. You're making me hurt you, and then say things like, I would love you if you would just do what I tell you to do or whatever. They just want to keep this person under their thumb, under their feet, and it's a control power trip is what it is. That's mainly what it is. And it's horrific, absolutely horrific. So this person is trapped thinking that they love this abuser, even though they abuse them. That's horrific. And they said, another one is, the victim believes the abuse is a normal part of a relationship. Now that's a little bit odd, but that can happen, There's been plenty of cases of people who have been in these relationships who maybe they were abused as children or they witnessed abuse themselves. And in their childhood, they might have been abused themselves. Maybe their own parents or caregivers were involved in domestic violence and abuse, and that's what they grew up with, and so they think it's normal. And they think it's just that it's the way that it is, right? And that's kind of sad, but that's true because, my parents did that. My parents were both abused as children, both of them, and then they got together, and then they abused each other, and they just thought that was life. That's what you do, right? You just abuse your children, you abuse your wife, and it's just, horrific. My mom was abused as a child, and then she just figured, well, I guess I'm just going to stay in this because this is all I know anyway, And then, did my siblings abuse their children? Well, one of them did. One of my oldest sister actually was the abuser in her home. She abused her husband and her children. She didn't really abuse them, I don't think, as bad as my mom abused me, but our parents abused us, But she didn't treat her children all that well. She was the power trip control person in the home, and she was, she just wasn't all that. She just wasn't all that loving or caring, I don't think. Even though I know she did care for her children and love them, she just didn't know. She just wanted to be in control and in power, and that way nobody could abuse her anymore, And so, it does run in cycles, But not always, because then my other sister, who was 5 years older than me, did not abuse her children, even though we grew up in this abuse situation. But my sister, who's 5 years older than me, actually was in an abusive relationship with her husband, who after a few years started abusing her physically and emotionally, psychologically. And she got out, thank God. We got her to get out because we talked to her, and she just was going to stay and take it. She's like, well, it was my fault. He had been beating on her, and he bruised her face up and gave her a black eye, and threw her into a microwave cart and hurt her back and everything. And she came over to the house one time to talk to my mom, and I was there, and I saw this. She was wearing sunglasses, and I was like, what are you doing with your sunglasses on in the house? I knew something was wrong with her. She was crying, and she's like, well, I've got a migraine. I said, no, take them off, ma'am. So we made her take her sunglasses off, and she had a big old black eye and cuts, and I said, you're not going to sit there and take that from him. You're not going to stay in that, are you? You're not really going to do that. You're not going to allow yourself to be abused. She's like, well, it was kind of my fault. I'm the one that caused it. I'm like, oh, yeah, we're going to go there now. With the, like, you did something to cause that. Right. Okay. Yeah. And my mom's just sitting there just going, oh, well. And my mom had been taking that for years. My mom had been abused for years, and she was just like, oh, fine with that, with her seeing her own daughter be abused by her own husband. And I'm sitting there going, no, 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 no. No, you're not going to allow that. She, I mean, I couldn't tell her what to do. She's my sister, right? My older sister. But the thing is I really let her understand very carefully what was going on there. And I said, do you think he's going to change? Do you think he's going to change? She did eventually divorce him. And, I'm so glad because she has an abuse-free life now. And that makes me happy. And her daughter's not having to witness them fighting and abusing each other. And she didn't abuse her daughter, which is great. So she raised her daughter very well, and my niece. And, so it's not that all people who have been abused will go on to abuse their children or be an abuser in a family, but in a situation. But it can happen, right? And here's another one. Why don't people leave? Well, because they said here, the victim is financially dependent on the abuser. That's a big one. And a lot of times people, they'd rather stay in an abusive situation and allow themselves and even their children to be abused than to be than to have to go to a shelter or to be in an unsecure situation where they don't know where they're going to be. Now, does that make sense or not? Like, to me, no. To somebody else, maybe, because they can't take not knowing where they're going to live for a while until they get things straightened out once they get away from their abuser. And this is sad because so many times a lot of people do stay in abuse, they allow themselves to be abused and allow their children to be abused because they don't want the fear of not knowing where they're going to be for a few months. Because when you do leave, it's going to be a bumpy road for a while till you get back on your feet, till you get on your feet, period. And it's a hard, hard road. But it's worth it because you deserve that. I deserve that. Nobody deserves to be abused. I don't care what anybody says. There's no excuse for it. There's absolutely no excuse for it. So that's just another reason, though, why people would stay. Here's another one. The abuser has threatened to take the victim's children away if they leave, if he or she leaves. Threatened to take the victim's children away. That's a big one. And that happens all the time. I see headline after headline. And not only that, but I'm sort of hooked up, on Facebook and whatnot with so many different people because of what I do, talking about abuse, child abuse especially, and domestic violence and stuff. I have a lot of friends and a lot of people who I'm in touch with, and they share a lot of information with me, not privately, just, they're involved in different groups and whatnot. And this happens all the time. Abusers threatening to take the victim's children away. And it actually happens all the time. They do end up winning custody because they've beaten that other person down, whoever it is, whether it's a man or a woman. They've beaten them down to the point where they have no self-esteem. They have no coping abilities, because that's what abuse does to you. Let me tell you, I can tell you firsthand what abuse does to you, man. They're so beaten down, they don't think, they can't even think straight, usually, and so they look crazy. And the abuser looks fine because they're in control. They're in perfect control. And they make it look like as if it's the victim's problem, the victim's crazy, and they get the children away from these people. And then the victim, after they actually leave these abusive relationships, if they get away, and they know that the children are living with this abuser, they're worried for their children's lives because they're worried that this abuser, whoever this partner of theirs is going to hurt the children. But how are they going to prove it? Because more than likely they got restraining orders, and they're not allowed to. They may be allowed to see them, but maybe only under supervised situation. And how are they going to prove abuse? It's a sad situation. This stuff is actually going on, and it goes on and on and on, all over the place. And this is horrific. It's absolutely horrific. Here's another one. Why someone wouldn't just leave? The victim wants her or his children to have two parents. So this might be an issue where somebody feels that it is just so important for the children to have two parents and not come from not be not be shuffled back and forth, or coming from a single parent family situation, that they'll stay together and the abuse will continue on. The abuser will just continue to abuse the poor victim because that victim says, it's probably best that the children have two parents. But that's actually that's not a good way to look at it, but people do look at it that way. But the issue is those children will be affected by that abuse. I remember my mom and how she was and what my dad used to do to her. My mom was actually not deserving of any of that. Nobody deserves to be abused physically, emotionally, psychologically, in any way. Sexually. My dad was raping my mother. That's marital rape. We're going to talk about that here in the future. There's lots of information about that. He was physically violent towards her. She was sick already, and she was a big lady. It's not that she couldn't take care of herself, but she was already sick. She had a lot of health problems, and she had a lot of body problems. And he was just abusing her before they were married. And they got married when they were young. My parents were married not super young, like 16 or anything. But they were married at 20. I think my mom was probably 19, 20 when she got married, and my dad was probably 24, And so they weren't super young, but they weren't super old either. And my dad had been abusing her before they were even married. But my mom married him to get out of her abusive home. Because my mom grew up in an abusive home. Her mother was her abuser. So then my mom was my abuser, see. It just went like in a cycle, right? So she wanted to get away from her abuser mother, so she back in the 40s, because my mom was born in 1927, my dad was born in 1923, so they were born and lived through the Great Depression, and they were, it was just abusive environments they grew up in, and my dad just thought it was okay to abuse her even before they were married, and then after they were married, he just kept on abusing her. And she tried to divorce him in Canada. But back in the late 40s, even in late 40s, they wouldn't let my mom divorce my dad because even though my mom said that she told the courts that he was abusing her and the children. I wasn't born yet. I wasn't born at this time, but my older siblings. And the courts wouldn't allow the courts wouldn't allow my mom to divorce my dad because there was no infidelity. So it was okay that my dad abused them. It was perfectly fine. Nothing was done. Okay, then there was another, incident where my brothers brought up on, abused, and my dad and my mom were brought up on child abuse charges against us, and nothing's done. See, it's not always that people will get help, right? It's not always that children will be saved. That's why we're finding these headlines of these children that have been murdered. I just survived the abuse. The abuse wasn't so severe that it killed me. It could have killed me. My mom did dish out some beatings that could have killed me. The CSA Child Sexual Abuse could have killed me because I had a major, I won't get too graphic here, but major infection because of it, and I was sick. And, it's just absolutely horrific what this stuff does to people. It's absolutely horrific. And yet, we got a world that says, "Oh, who cares?" It's like, no, we all need to care about this, because you do know somebody probably. You probably do know somebody who's a victim right now of some type of abuse. Whether it's a man or a woman. And you probably know someone who is a victim of who is a survivor of child abuse. If you know me, then you know one. And so, it's absolutely horrific. So, yeah, nobody deserves this stuff. It's absolutely horrific. So we got time for maybe another couple little pieces here. They said here another reason, this is a big one, why they don't just leave. The victim's religious and or cultural beliefs preclude him or her from leaving. So religious or cultural beliefs might be an issue. That's a big issue, especially for around the world. Not so much maybe in North America, a little bit. There's, still people who are coming from different cultural backgrounds and beliefs, and they stay together no matter what. Even if the other partner, just threatens to kill them and actually does kill them, that's fine because that's their belief, right? So a lot of people will stay in abuse because of that, religious or cultural beliefs. Another one is the victim has low self-esteem and believes that he or she is to blame for the abuse. That's a big one, because people who are abused are generally beaten down to the point where, even if it's not physical, even if it's not physical battery, we're talking like emotionally beaten down, psychologically beaten down, spiritually beaten down in every way, to the point where they don't have any self-esteem. And they do quite often take on the blame, just like my sister did there. She was abused as a child. My mom didn't abuse her like she abused me, because I would have noticed. I was always sticking up for my sister. She was 5 years older than me, but my mom used to slap her around and stuff. And I used to stick up for my sister, but my mom used to beat me horrifically with heavy objects and break my head open and stuff. She cracked my skull several times and just beat me horrifically. And my sister never stood up for me, never. So, it doesn't always work that somebody will have your back, you know what I mean? But that's all right. She just didn't want to get beat, so she just stayed out of it. But I'd try to stick up for my sister, even if it got me a beating. I was trying to, I would try to protect her. And it's like, my sister had low self-esteem. We all did, coming from this situation, watching my dad abuse my mom and rape my mom and hurt my mom, and then my mom, screaming at him and then beating on us, and my dad beating on us. And we all had some serious low self-esteem problems. And I didn't take on the blame for the abuse because, my parents were brought up on abuse charges. I knew it wasn't my fault. They had been abusing my older siblings for years, long before I was born. They had lots of practice by the time I came around. And they, a lot of my siblings had low self-esteem, for sure. Because it's this whole, it's just this whole stigma of waking up in the morning and knowing what's been going on all night between your parents fighting and mom screaming, getting slapped around, brothers are trying to help, they get beat up, and then you just wonder who's going to kill who while you're sitting in school. That's what I was talking about earlier. I think I didn't finish my sentence, but earlier I was talking about that. I used to sit in class and wonder who was going to kill who. Was my mom going to kill my dad, or would my dad kill my mom by just beating her too badly, or would my mom just stab him to death? I just had this feeling that one day I was going to get a call to the principal's office, and it would be somebody in my family, one of my older siblings, coming to pick me up and tell me that one of my parents was dead, that one of them had killed each other. I wasn't sure whether it'd be my mom killing my dad or my dad killing my mom, but that's how horrific it was for me to grow up and witness that domestic violence and hatred and horrific abuse come between them. And it's hard. It's very, very hard then to deal with these things later on as an adult. And this low self-esteem stuff. A lot of times these people, these victims believe that they're to blame for the abuse. They'll actually take the responsibility on, like my sister did. Saying, "Oh, well, it was my fault." I'm like, "Oh, no, we're not going there. It was not your fault. There's no excuse for abuse, none whatsoever." And so it's absolutely horrific what people do to each other, and this is not okay. This is why I speak out against this stuff. This is why I do these shows, because we all need to be standing up and speaking out against this. This is so incredibly wrong. You see somebody that's being abused, you get them some help, and a child's being abused, you make sure you do the right thing. You get that child some help. Don't report it to CPS first. Report it to the police as a crime. Child abuse is a crime. It needs to be reported properly to the police as a crime. And it's not something that's just it's just probably just discipline. No, there's no excuse for abuse, and it's just wrong. It's got to stop, man. So we have about 2 minutes left here. So we'll pick up the rest of this article here, but you can get this from the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence.org, ncadv.org. And then there's lots of other great websites out there too. Just type in domestic violence into your browser, and it'll just bring up all kinds of stuff there, and you can read all kinds of info. If you're a survivor, like I said, if you're a survivor, stick it out, get some help. Don't suffer on your own. If you're someone who's being abused right now, you make sure that you get some help. Do not allow yourself to be abused. And until next time, you have a great night, and we'll talk to you real soon.